There are a lot of reasons why you might need to add a second service. You're growing, you want to reach more people, the facility that you're in, but the question might be, how do we actually go about doing that? And so today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to give you 5 tips for adding a second service.
Welcome back to Practical Church Planting, where in 15 minutes or less, we'll give you practical tips, advice, and encouragement to help you plant and grow healthy churches. My name is Brian Adrosian. Joining me next to me is Dylan Dotson, and today we're talking about 5 tips for adding a second service.
Yes, I am joining you next to you.
Yes, if you can't see the video, next to me.
Now, I want to be clear. I mean, this is Practical Church Planting, so maybe the majority of you are like, second service, I'm trying to just get one.
Yep.
But maybe you're at the close point like we were. We found that we actually had to go to two services sooner than we thought we had to. And so we're just going to talk about the importance of it. Real quick for us, we are at 2 services now. We're actually planning to go to 3 at the fall. But last summer we were planning to go at 2. Just to give you some perspective, at the size that our space was, including kids, everybody serving everybody, I thought that at 100 people is when we needed to go to 2 services. And yet I found, and you might be interested, this might be helpful for you to do, that every time we hit 80 people, we would go back down for like a month. And then we'd like get back up and then we'd go back down. And so we found that 80 is actually the problem, not 100. Same thing for us now. I thought like 170, 180, because our space is small and and we're looking, but we don't have any other options right now. So we're here. Yep. That 170, 180 would be the breaking point before we needed 3. And yet we have found this year that every time we hit 150, we go back down. Yep. And then a month later, we'll get back up. And so we've found, okay, that now it's time to go to 3 services. And so if you're there, maybe look at your thing, but it might come sooner rather than later. I'll have to say, here are 5 tips for adding a second service if and when it is necessary.
That's right.
Number 1, this is actually really important, I think. Maybe I could be wrong on this. But you want to keep them between 9 and 11. Now, of course, the length of your service and the background you're in could play a part in this. But if your service is anywhere between an hour and an hour and a half, you could hopefully do this. So, for example, like for us right now, we have 2 services, 9:30 and 11. This is not to say they both have to start and end, but they both need to start between 9 and 11. Statistically speaking, that is the most optimal time that people look to go to a church service. And so you could do like 8:30 and 10 if you wanted to, but you're probably getting a little too early there. Or you could do like 10 and 11:30. But if you only have 2 services at 11:30, ideally, optimally is a little bit too later. Yeah. Research that we looked at when we were trying to figure out our times was pretty clear that between 9 and 11 is the best time to have 2 services.
Yeah. And I'll say there is research out there for other days as well. So if you're because of the space you meet, you meet Saturday nights instead of Sunday mornings or Sunday evenings, and you have to add a second service, there is research showing like what times in that period of the day are best.
Right.
So even if you're not on Sunday morning, still find those. They're not hard to find. And
if you're on a Saturday evening, what are the best 2 times?
Yeah. And you can find that.
Because I would definitely recommend, I know one church said they did 2 different days. If you're going from 1 to 2 services, I would keep them on the same day because it's just, you don't want to deal with that headache yet, especially if you're a smaller church. But between 9 and 11 is the most optimal time. Yep. That's number 1. Number 2, have a plan before you need it. So don't wait until we're at max capacity or we keep losing people to actually come up with a plan. Yeah. Come up with a plan before you need it. So before we went to 2 services, we had a plan of how we were going to do it. It was a good thing because we actually had to move up going to 2 services by a few weeks sooner than we had thought. But because we had a plan, we were good. Now we've formulated a plan for 3 services in the fall. And if by chance we have to move it up, I mean, who knows? Yep. We're ready. But even if we don't, we're ready. We're not stretched out. We're not like, oh, we've got too many people. What do we do? So begin to think through, what does it look like to have 2 services? What does it look like for our serve team, for our band, for kids? Yeah. What are we going to do? Because there's nothing worse than, people always say it's a good problem to have when you're growing, which it is. But it's also frustrating because you don't want, a lot of people are only going to give you 1 shot, unfortunately. And so you want to do the best that you can do. And so what you don't want to have happen is being running out of space and trying to frantically come up with something so that next week you can go to 2 services and then it doesn't go very well.
Yeah. It does take a lot of planning too. Like when it comes to scheduling volunteers and especially when things like band and things like that, it does take some work to go in ahead of time. So plan for it before you need it because like you said, it's not something that you're just going to be able to throw together and do well in a week or probably even a couple, depending on size, but probably even a couple weeks. It takes some time to figure this out and for other reasons we'll talk about later of explaining why and things like that. So don't wait till the last minute. Have a plan in place before you need it.
And with that, stick to your plan. Obviously, if you see things are not working, change it. But for us, one of the things that we do differently than a lot of churches is that we kids is different, but if you serve on hospitality, for example, you serve once a month at both services. Yeah. So we don't have people serving at one service each. When we switched, we had some people that, because it's a new thing, they didn't like that idea. They said, we had a couple people ask if they could just serve one. We said no, because we didn't want to make exceptions for one person and another person. It just would have gotten out of hand.
Yeah.
So some people weren't a fan of that. But since then, now nobody complains because it's the new normal. Mm-hmm. So just know whenever you introduce change, there's going to be some friction, and that is okay. We'll talk about that in a second.
Yep.
But stick to your plan. Don't make exceptions for people, because that will only lead to either nightmares down the road because other people are going to want to do it, or hard conversations that are a lot harder down the road when you say, hey, actually, this doesn't work anymore. And they could say, well, why did you let me do it in the first place? It's hard, but make sure you stick to your plan. It's really important.
That's a good point. That's like point 2B.
Yes.
Have a plan and stick to it.
Number 3, be proactive if possible. So here's what we mean. If you see you're kind of growing, whatever, and you know certain times of the year have bigger attended, then what does it look like to maybe this is the best time to add the service? So adding a second service, for example, on July 4th weekend, it's not a good idea.
Probably not.
But however, adding a second service in August or September or in January is a good idea. So this is exactly how we planned this last year. We said the second week, so the week after Labor Day in September, we're going to go to 2 services, because we already know that people are coming back. Our college students are coming back. Now, we ended up moving it up because we were busy.
Yeah.
But that's how we're doing it now this year too. That at this moment, I mean, it's for us, May through the July 4th weekend, which as we recorded this just happened, is our lowest month. So it's really hard to tell. But as of right now, we don't necessarily need 3 services. Now we know that we will.
Yeah.
But we're planning for it at the fall, not some like the week before Thanksgiving. Like knowing that the more high attended months will help you give the momentum to try to fill in those services, so it's not as awkward if you're strategic about when that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think this goes pretty well with point 2, is have a plan. And so if you have a plan for the most optimal time.
Right.
Like if you don't have a plan for it and you just kind of do it when you see it's necessary, it may it's kind of weird how it worked out for us. We're recording this a couple days after 4th of July. So the 5th of July, whatever was Sunday, was a lower day. I think that's pretty normal across churches. But the week before was actually pretty high. Mm-hmm. And so if we didn't have a plan in place, or we're just kind of going by like week to week, we could have been like, oh man, we got to do something, because we really did need, we really kind of needed a third service that day. But if we didn't plan it out, then it would have been very easy for us to be like, okay, we got to figure this out and plan. And then the following week is a low week, you know? And so if you're not planning ahead, you can take these kind of like spikes, and even spikes that last a couple weeks, and kind of overreact to them, and then end up kind of
that's a good point. So being proactive. And again, I would say if you've been going on for over a year, especially over a year, it's really helpful because it's the second time around or longer. Look at your attendance, and you might be interested to see, where do these spikes hit? Obviously, Easter, certain things will be bigger because they're that, but like I was, you might be shocked to find out some information there. So be proactive if possible. Number 4, explain the why no matter what. What was interesting, when we were going to 2 services, I was not trying to figure out, but I was planning on how is it going to explain to our church why we were going to 2 services when it didn't necessarily seem like we had to. Because your people they're not in church world. They don't understand that after a certain percent, like if your auditorium is 90% full, people are going to stop coming. They don't get that. And they like to see their friends. Like they don't understand serving and how many kids there are in the parking lot. Like they're not thinking through everything that influences how many people will come. And so I had this thing of, here's why we're going to do this. Now, and then July happened and we started getting full, and so we had to move it up. And so the why, in terms of like why it doesn't seem necessary, didn't have to happen, but we still had to explain, here's why we're going to 2 services. Because going from 1 to 2 is probably the hardest for your people, not for your church, but for your people, because they're used to seeing everybody, and explaining the mission, explaining why we want to see people meet Jesus, and explaining how community groups are important. Like if you want relationships, this is a great way to do those. Always explain the why, even if your church is full and it may seem obvious, because otherwise people could falsely think it's all about the numbers and not about the mission. So always explain why you're doing it.
No, I think that's good. I don't really have anything to add. I mean, I think we can assume people know why without giving them a why for really any decision in church. And so it never, I don't think you can, well, I mean you can, but I don't think it ever hurts to over explain or over cast vision or over give the reason why. And really the reason why is just an excuse, I guess, to cast vision and to be able to talk about an exciting future for the church. And
again, we say this often here. It's okay for people to be upset and give pushback. You've been thinking about this forever. They just heard about it. And because this is how we're created, and the first thing we always think about is, how is this going to affect me? We're not thinking about how it's going to affect the church or other people. We're thinking about our relationships and the schedule that we have on Sunday based on this one service or whatever. And so it's okay for people. We had some people that were frustrated, not a ton. I think part of it was because we explained why a lot. But they were kind of like, I don't understand. I don't really like it. But it's okay to hear that, as long as that they feel like you listened and you still stick to what you're doing, and they at least can see why you're doing it. They're much more likely to go along. So don't get mad just because someone gets frustrated. Give them some time to adjust, and they'll see it too. But if you don't explain the why, they never will.
That's true.
That's number 4. And number 5, make adjustments sooner rather than later. So you could feel bad, and I think we've said this before, when you do something and then you realize it's not working and you're like, well, if I change it too soon, everyone's going to be like, why are you doing this? I had one of the guys here at our church who's a mentor to me. We went to 2 services. We started with 9, 15, and 11. Mm-hmm. And after the first week and after the second week, we noticed that was like 10 more minutes than we needed.
Yeah,
like we
a lot of dead time in between.
Again, because we're a smaller church, smaller environment. We don't have hundreds of people going in and out. We didn't need 45 minutes. And so I was like, can we change it? Or are people going to be like, why are they already changing it? And he said to me, which is so true, he said, oftentimes the people in the church know something needs to be changed and they're wondering why their leadership isn't doing anything about it, and it causes them to lose trust.
Yeah.
Nobody said anything, but everybody knew 45 minutes was too long. Now, we're not going to change it now. We could probably get away with 45 minutes now.
Probably.
But we couldn't then. And so literally the third week after the second service, we emailed everybody, we told everybody, hey, we're switching service times. Mm-hmm. We made an adjustment. And so don't be afraid to tweak things or change things. I know you planned it one way, but you don't actually know until you do it.
Yep.
Not just staying to the way you've always done it, even though you know it's not working, is not good for anybody.
Yeah, I mean, you're never going to know exactly how things play out until they play out in real life. And so you can plan all you want. And you should plan. I'm not trying to go against what we said before.
Right.
Plan out, but be willing to, as things happen and things don't work out the way you thought, be willing to make adjustments and be willing to change. I mean, you have to with anything in church.
And with that, if you're really nervous, if you feel like this 2-service thing is what you need to do and you're nervous about it, even say things like, hey, we're going to do this for 5 weeks, and actually commit to it. But if you're not quite sure how it's going to work, say, hey, we're going to do this for 5 weeks, and then after 5 weeks, if it's still working, you keep it going. But if it's not, it's an easy way to shut it down.
Yeah.
So that's, big over. Like, that's what we're going to do with our third service when we introduce it, is, we're going to say, hey, we're going to try this for 4 or 5 weeks or whatever. Because honestly, you're going to know if it's working either or not, too.
Yeah.
So that's the big thing. But even for the small things, just don't feel bad about adjusting service times or whatever, for whatever the reason it might be, or how you serve, how you do your volunteers and you serve people. You got to do what's best. And so oftentimes people can know if it's not working as well. So don't be afraid to change it.
Yep. And the little caveat I'll add to that is have some confidence in your decisions after, I guess, in other words, don't get known as someone who's just going to flip on everything. So have some confidence in your decision. If something you think is working and it appears to be working, stick with it. Like, in other words, don't always change because you're hoping it could maybe be a little better.
Right.
But if you see something's not working, change.
And that's a good point. If you see something's working and people are complaining about it, don't change it. Right. There's this I don't know what book I was reading, but Facebook changes all the time. Everyone hates it.
Yeah.
I feel like people are used to it now, but everyone hates it, but then everybody used it. I was like, this is why Facebook works, because it's not like MySpace or all these other things. Like, they adjusted when they didn't have to, and then it kept it fresh. People use it.
Yep.
And they said when Facebook originally started the news feed, so before it's kind of like Twitter-ish now, where like you can, and news people post their own status and you see it. When that first started, everybody hated it. There were Facebook pages that were made before groups were a thing about how they hated it or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're like, we don't like this. It's too intrusive. We like the old way. But I was reading this thing talking about how Mark Zuckerberg, I think that's his name, he had all this data that showed that everybody hated it. But I don't know if it was 1.5 or 2 times the amount of time on Facebook, more time on the platform. So the amount of time on Facebook skyrocketed while everyone was complaining. So they were saying one thing, but they it wasn't actually true, because they were actually creeping on their friends all the time. So if you know something is working, again, have grace and compassion, but don't change something just because somebody's complaining, because they don't see the whole picture like you do. If you know it's working, stick to your guns, because that's important too.
Yep.
So thanks for being with us today. As always, go to Facebook, Practical Church Planting Facebook group.
Yes.
Join it.
Love to have you.
Love to have you. And also go to practicalplanting.com/questions if you have a question you want us to talk about in a future episode. And until next time, we'll see you on Practical Church Planting. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Practical Church Planting. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Practical Planting, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you like or subscribe or do whatever it's telling you to do or should do on that platform.
And hey, if you are so tired of looking at our ugly faces, but you're not tired of listening to our beautiful voices, then you can find our podcast if you just search Practical Church Planting on iTunes or Google Play. Make sure not to just find it, not just to listen, but to subscribe.
Make sure you subscribe. Brian, tell them to subscribe.
Subscribe.
See you next time.